June 27, 1944. 0618 hours. 1 kilometer west of Villers-Bocage, France. The hedgerows trapped moisture from the night rain and turned the shallow lanes into damp corridors of mud and steam. The fog had begun to lift, yet the air clung heavy around the infantry of the 30th Division. Every sound carried unevenly in the bocage. Every breath felt close to the ground. Each man knew the Germans owned the angles in this maze. They moved through it with a discipline that punished hesitation. The Allies had pushed inland from the beaches, but the fighting had turned into a slow grind. Patrols vanished. Scouts returned shaken. Platoons crossed fields that looked open only to discover hidden fire sacks cut into the hedge walls. Nothing behaved the way doctrine predicted. The terrain rewrote the rules hour by hour. Private Elias Thorne walked in the middle of 2nd Squad with the steady gait of someone who had lived most of his life outdoors. He was 32. Older than the 19-year-olds who made up half the rifle platoon. His face carried the muted calm of someone who had measured too many fence posts under rising storm clouds back in Nebraska. The war had turned him into a rifleman, but the land still trained his eyes. He judged angles without thinking. He found uneven slopes by instinct. He noticed shadows where a gap did not belong. His squad relied on that quiet awareness, even if they joked that he talked more to terrain than people. The bocage had exposed one problem again and again. The standard M1 Garand sights needed clean time on target. Thorne respected the rifle. He liked its reliability and the way its recoil settled straight back into his shoulder. He disliked the fine alignment the rear sight demanded when a target appeared for only a second in a narrow hedge gap. German patrols moved fast. They fired bursts and ducked behind vegetation faster than most men could bring sights into clean focus. The young soldiers blamed nerves. The NCOs blamed lack of discipline. Thorne blamed physics. The rear aperture was too small for snapshots and shifting light. It kept accuracy high on flat ranges and training. It punished hesitation inside a living maze. Their first week in the hedgerows proved the cost. On June 23, 2 men from 1st Squad took rounds before they even identified the source. A German rifleman fired through a hedge crease barely wide enough for his muzzle. By the time the Americans returned fire, he had shifted positions and disappeared. The platoon sergeant ordered tighter formations. That slowed movement and exposed them to mortar bracketing. Another patrol moved looser. That created gaps that broke fire coordination. No solution worked cleanly. The terrain absorbed every mistake and returned it in casualties. Thorne grew restless. He disliked problems that refused to move. On the ranch he always built tools to match terrain. He cut fence wire at angles that suited rolling hills. He carved quick markers for sight lines when storms threatened cattle drives. He improvised constantly. The war expected him to treat equipment as sacred. Regulations governed everything from cleaning rods to sling tension. Officers repeated that uniformity kept units predictable and safe. Thorne agreed with the principle. He disagreed with applying it blindly in a place where sight lines changed every 10 meters. He studied his rifle in the evening after chow. He pulled the bolt back and checked carbon buildup. He rubbed the stock with a cloth he kept from home. He stared longest at the rear sight assembly. The aperture was too narrow for the shadows of the bocage. Too disciplined for a terrain that punished discipline. He needed something faster. He needed a way to index a target the moment it appeared without threading his eye through a pinhole. He found the material 2 days later on the edge of a ruined farm. A rusted corner bracket lay half buried near a collapsed fence. The hinge still held a short piece of twisted wire. It had been part of a cattle gate before artillery traded ownership of the land. The wire kept its shape despite rust. The bracket was bent at a clean 90-degree angle. Thorne picked it up and felt the weight. It reminded him of the corner markers he used back home for quick line checks. He turned it in his hands and imagined it sitting atop his rifle. The idea formed fast. A large open aperture that allowed quick sight alignment. A simple frame that guided his eye without slowing him. He returned to his foxhole after dusk and worked by touch. He shaped the wire into a wider circle. He pressed the rusted bracket against the rifle's upper handguard. He tested the alignment against distant silhouettes. It was crude. It lacked finish. It lacked any official blessing. It worked. His eye fell naturally into the frame. The larger aperture let light flood through. He could pick up a target in half the time. The device did not replace the standard sight. It sat ahead of it. The rifle still shot true. The modification let him react before the Germans disappeared into the foliage. He kept it quiet for a day. Then Sergeant Keller noticed it during morning inspection. Keller was a strict NCO who respected discipline more than innovation. He respected Thorne but valued standards more. His jaw tightened when he saw the bent metal fixed to the rifle. He said nothing at first. He lifted the rifle, sighted through it, and exhaled through his nose in irritation. He told Thorne to remove the device immediately. He said modifications violated equipment regulations. He warned that anything bolted to a handguard could snag on gear or block proper sight use. His tone left no room for debate. Thorne complied outwardly. He removed the piece and placed it in his pack. Keller moved on. The inspection ended. The squad marched out toward another hedgerow lane. The day passed with scattered rifle cracks, distant German shouting, and the uneasy quiet of bocage combat. Thorne kept thinking about the seconds lost when a shadow moved in a hedge fold and his eye had to search for the tiny aperture again. He never ignored a working tool. That instinct had kept his ranch afloat when storms ruined half the season's plans. It felt wrong to walk into combat without the device. That night he reattached it. He did it quietly. No one objected. The squad had begun to understand that survival sometimes demanded quiet disobedience. They had seen too many narrow engagements turn bloody because someone hesitated. They trusted Thorne's sense of terrain. They trusted the quiet logic he applied to problems. The next morning they crossed another set of fields near Villers-Bocage. The hedgerows grew thicker in this sector. The Germans had carved firing slits into the living walls. Machine gun nests moved daily. Foot patrols probed weak points. Thorne studied each corner like a surveyor measuring a new fence line. His rifle felt different with the improvised sight mounted. It felt suited for this land. At 0734 hours the platoon halted. A distant crack echoed through the hedge corridors. The point element dropped and reported movement ahead. Germans shifting positions. Likely a patrol. The squad stacked along the hedge bank. Keller signaled for silence. The air thinned as everyone listened. A branch snapped 50 meters ahead. A boot scuffed stone. The Germans were close. Too close for slow sight alignment. The squad tightened its formation along the hedge wall. No one spoke. No one shifted. Wait. The bocage punished noise. Sergeant Keller raised 2 fingers and pointed left. Thorne and 2 riflemen crawled along the ditch line, keeping their helmets low under the moss and tangled roots. The ground smelled of wet soil and rotting leaves. Water soaked through their sleeves. The Germans advanced along the opposite hedge, unaware of the Americans waiting only meters away behind the growth. Keller mouthed a warning. Movement on the right flank. A second German element. The patrol was performing a pincer sweep, a tactic common in this sector. They sent one team to draw attention while the second slipped behind likely cover positions. The Germans relied on quick calls from a patrol leader who signaled direction and tempo. If the leader survived long enough to issue orders, the patrol tightened its net until contact became inevitable. A faint snap of metal brushed the air. A rifle bolt chambered. The Germans were setting their fire angles. Thorne pressed his cheek to the hedge bank and listened. He tracked their rhythm, the way footsteps fell, the slight delay in one soldier's pace. He felt the squad's tension. Their rifles pointed toward gaps barely wider than a man's palm. Thorne looked through his improvised sight frame without raising the rifle high. The wide aperture let him track general motion without aligning precisely. It gave him awareness. It gave him a fraction of time that doctrine did not account for. A German helmet rose above the hedge crease. Only a silhouette. Too fast for the Garen's small rear aperture. It vanished before most riflemen could center it. Thorne's jaw clenched. That was the problem he had been fighting since landing in Normandy. By the time a soldier aligned the tiny peep sight, the target had shifted, ducked, or fired first. The Germans used the terrain's broken sight lines to their advantage. They shot from micro gaps, then faded into the hedge ribs. Keller signaled again. Prepare to fire. The squad angled their muzzles into likely lanes. The Germans took another step. Twigs snapped. Thorne exhaled once. He stayed still. He knew the patrol leader would appear somewhere central, somewhere that allowed him to see both elements. Leaders in these formations habitually checked both flanks before committing to fire. That brief moment exposed them. It also shaped everything that followed. Kill the leader and the attack stuttered. Kill him fast and the patrol dissolved into confusion. Another German silhouette shifted behind layered foliage. Thorne recognized the motion. It was deliberate. It was scanning. The patrol leader was checking the alignment of his 2 teams. Thorne raised his rifle slightly. The rusted fence corner sight caught the faint morning light. The aperture framed the shadow instantly. No searching. No centering. Just a natural visual funnel that guided his focus. The standard sight sat behind it, ready for the shot if needed. The device gave him speed. The rifle gave him accuracy. Before he could fire, Keller hissed a command. Hold. They needed confirmation. Firing too early risked revealing their position before the Germans fully entered the kill lane. The squad waited. Seconds dragged. The Germans advanced another step. The leader leaned forward through a narrow break, scanning the lane. He exposed his face for less than a heartbeat. Even Keller missed the shot window. Thorne did not. He kept his finger off the trigger, studying the timing. The leader moved with predictable rhythm. He would check the lane again. Leaders always did. They trusted their senses in this terrain. They scanned twice before committing. Thorne locked the rifle into his shoulder. The improvised sight opened the world into a clean circle. He did not rely on perfect sight picture. He relied on instinct sharpened by years of lining up fence posts across uneven land. A German whispered something sharp. Thorne heard the tone. It carried mild frustration, the sound of someone signaling that the lane remained unclear. That meant another scan was coming. Thorne's pulse steadied. His grip firmed. His cheek welded to the stock. He tracked the faint shift of light in the hedge gap. The silhouette reappeared. Thorne fired one controlled shot. The crack echoed down the lane. The German patrol leader collapsed without a sound. His body fell sideways against the hedge, dragging leaves with him. The two German elements froze. Confusion rippled through their formation. Without the leader's hand signals, their timing broke. Two riflemen fired reflexively into the hedgerow. Their bullets scattered high. Another turned and shouted for direction. The patrol began to unravel. Keller snapped an order. Engage. Second squad unleashed disciplined fire. 8 Garens thundered. A bar team stitched the right flank with suppressive bursts. The hedgerow shook under the impact. Germans scrambled for cover, but their coordinated sweep had already failed. Without the leader's calls, both elements moved at cross purposes. One group fell back toward the hedgerow corner. The other advanced half a step before realizing they lacked direction. Their hesitation created open angles. The Americans exploited them. Thorne chambered another round. He saw a German rifleman crouch behind a broken stump. Thorne's improvised sight framed the movement faster than the standard aperture ever could. He fired again. The round struck the stump's edge and deflected into the man's shoulder. The German fell back with a cry. Another German tried to drag him clear, but the bar forced him down. A German machine gun opened on their flank, sweeping the ditch line. Dirt exploded around Thorne as he ducked. The weapon fired from a recessed cut in the hedge. A prepared pocket. The Germans had carved firing points throughout this region. This one pinned the squad's right element. Keller barked for smoke grenades. 2 men threw them. Gray plumes thickened the lane. The machine gun fire slowed as the gunners lost visibility. Thorne crawled forward under the smoke. He reached a broken root cluster that gave partial cover. He raised his rifle and scanned. He needed the gunner. The smoke drifted, revealing a faint outline of the MG barrel protruding from the hedge slit. The standard sight would have taken too long. Targets at this distance shifted fast in fog. Thorne aligned through the fence corner frame. The wider aperture let him isolate the motion of the gunner's shoulder. He fired. The shadow jerked. The machine gun fell silent. The squad advanced 3 meters. Keller ordered them to hold position and check casualties. No Americans had been hit. 2 had taken splinters from ricochets, but nothing fatal. Keller looked at the hedge gap where the patrol leader lay. He looked at Thorne. His expression carried no smile, only measured recognition. He walked over and picked up Thorne's rifle. He sighted through the improvised device again. He lowered the rifle slowly. He did not speak. He simply handed it back. The squad regrouped and swept the lane. Bodies marked the collapse of the German patrol. Their radio carried incomplete messages. Their formation died with the leader. Thorne's single shot ended the coordination that would have trapped the Americans in 2 converging fire arcs. The platoon consolidated near a shallow crossroads cut between 2 towering hedgerows. Engineers had tried to widen the lanes in this sector the previous evening, but German mortar fire halted the work. The result was a cramped intersection with poor visibility and no clear firing arcs. Thorne stood near the left wall while Keller spoke quietly with Lieutenant Harper. The smoke from the engagement drifted east and thinned into the damp morning air. Harper studied the map. The company needed to clear a cluster of hedgerow enclosures leading toward a farmhouse marked on aerial photos. The German patrol they had just defeated was one of several rotating through that zone. If they failed to disrupt these patrol routes, the Germans would guide mortar fire with deadly accuracy. The enemy relied on these small patrol leaders who moved quickly through the hedgerows, carrying local knowledge of terrain folds and firing slits. Kill those leaders and the Germans lost coordination. Failed to kill them, and American squads walked into ambush patterns designed with precision. Harper called Keller over. He asked for a full breakdown of the engagement. Keller delivered it with clinical clarity. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He outlined the Germans' approach, the breakdown of their timing, and the squad's counterfire. When he reached the moment of the first shot, he paused. He glanced at Thorne without inviting him over. He continued. He said the patrol leader exposed himself briefly. He said the shot landed instantly. He said the German formation faltered the moment the leader dropped. Harper recognized the significance. He had watched too many engagements unfold in the bocage during the past weeks. Everything turned on seconds. Everything turned on the man who saw first. He asked how the shot had been taken so quickly. Keller hesitated. He shifted his weight. He said Thorne had used his rifle effectively. Harper heard the subtle omission. He had been an infantry officer long enough to know when a non-commissioned officer avoided a detail. He thanked Keller and walked off. Thorne remained near the hedge, running a cloth along the barrel. He kept the improvised sight attached. The rusted fence corner looked primitive against the rifle's clean metal. Harper approached and asked him to describe the device. Thorne answered calmly. He explained how the standard rear sight slowed target acquisition. He explained the need for a wide frame to catch movement. He described how the bocage forced soldiers to react faster than regular sights allowed. Harper listened without interrupting. Harper then asked whether he understood the regulations. Thorne nodded. He knew unauthorized modifications were banned. He also knew regulations did not anticipate hedgerow terrain where targets appeared for less than a second. Harper stared at the device again, then asked how long it took him to build. Thorne said 1 evening. Harper asked why he used rusted wire instead of cleaner metal. Thorne answered that it held shape and matched the natural coloration of the bocage, reducing reflection. Harper recognized the practicality. He also recognized the risk. A single soldier could not rewrite equipment doctrine, but men died when doctrine lagged behind reality. Harper told him to keep the device for now. He said nothing more. Keller overheard and raised an eyebrow but did not challenge the decision. The lieutenant's words settled the matter temporarily. The platoon resumed movement. They advanced along another narrow lane bordered by dense hedges that rose more than 2 meters high. The land dipped, then climbed into a shallow ridge that concealed sight lines. Every 20 meters a pocket of still air carried the smell of churned earth and burned cordite. The platoon proceeded with caution. Scouts checked creases and gaps with mirrors. The Germans often carved small tunnels through the hedges to fire diagonally into lanes without exposing themselves. The Americans studied these irregularities as if reading an unfamiliar language. Thorne walked third in formation. His rifle felt balanced with the improvised sight. He trusted his instincts without relying on perfect sight alignment. The frame acted as an extension of the land. It guided his eye based on habit rather than mechanical precision. He had built fences under storms where failing to move quickly meant losing livestock. He learned to trust the shape of things more than their measured dimensions. The column halted again. A distant engine rumbled. Likely a German half-track repositioning. The sound bounced along the hedges. The platoon knelt, waited, then continued. They reached a junction where the hedgerow wall curved sharply around a field. Keller ordered Thorne and 2 riflemen to scout the bend. They crawled forward carefully. The bend created a natural blind spot. A German could fire a single burst from that angle and vanish. The Americans had encountered this many times. Thorne kept his eye on the small apertures in the hedge. A section of foliage looked compressed. Not enough to reveal a clear gap, but enough to hint at movement behind it. He slowed. He raised his rifle slightly and peered through the fence corner frame. The wide aperture allowed him to see subtle shifts behind the leaves. Something was there. He signaled the others to stop. They froze. The compressed hedge section moved faintly. Then a small sliver of metal glinted behind it. Not bright. Just a dull reflection. Enough for Thorne to understand. A German rifle barrel aimed toward the lane. The enemy soldier waited for the Americans to round the bend. Thorne slid backwards and whispered to Keller. He described the position and the likely field of fire. Keller ordered a smoke grenade to be thrown left. The grenade arced over the bend and detonated in a thick cloud. The German fired blindly. The bullet snapped above Thorne's helmet. Keller shouted for the bar team. They moved into position and fired a controlled burst into the hedge at chest height. Leaves shredded. A cry followed. The firing stopped. The squad advanced and cleared the pocket. A German rifleman lay dead. His firing tunnel had been carved with precision. Without Thorn's early detection, the squad would have taken at least one casualty. Keller knew it. He said nothing, but he adjusted the squad spacing afterward. He placed Thorn closer to the front during scouting moments. By midday the platoon had seized the cluster of hedgerow enclosures marked on the map. Mortar fire dropped sporadically behind them, likely attempts to disrupt reinforcement routes. The company assembled near a tree line on the north side of the field. Officers updated their maps. Runners delivered new orders. The Germans still held a defensive line ahead, anchored by a farmhouse with firing arcs covering 3 approaches. The platoon settled temporarily. Men cleaned weapons, refilled canteens, and ate rations in silence. Thorn sat on a log inspecting the improvised site. The rust flaked softly under his thumb. The wire frame remained sturdy. He aligned it with the farmhouse roofline in the distance. The site opened the view clearly. He trusted it. Keller walked over. He crouched next to him. His tone was even. He said the device worked today. He also said it remained an unapproved modification. He said the lieutenant had allowed it for now, but higher command would not accept it. Regulations protected consistency of fire. They prevented accidents. They preserved uniformity. Keller understood all of that. He still could not ignore what he had seen. He asked Thorn how many seconds the device saved. Thorn answered simply, "Enough to fire." Before the Germans vanished. Keller nodded. He said battles in this terrain were decided by seconds. He stood and walked away. He did not ask Thorn to remove the device again. The company prepared for another push. German resistance increased in the outskirts of Villers-Bocage. Patrols reported more machine gun nests. Snipers fired from tree lines. Mortar teams struck hedgerow corners whenever American movement sounded concentrated. The next advance would be heavy. Thorn tightened the straps on his helmet and checked his pack. The sun pushed through the thinning clouds, lighting the field in dull silver. He felt the weight of the coming fight. He also felt the clarity the improvised sight gave him. He did not believe it made him a better marksman. It made him faster. Speed mattered in the Bocage. The push began at 1,520 hours. The company advanced in staggered squads along 3 separate hedgerow corridors that led toward the farmhouse ridge. The terrain climbed in a shallow rise that concealed enemy riflemen. German snipers often used the upper edges of hedgerows to fire downward at advancing troops. The platoon moved carefully, placing scouts at every bend. The sound of intermittent small arms fire drifted from the east. Another company was engaging a forward German screen. Thorn walked second in formation. Keller took point for the first 20 meters, then signaled for Thorn to rotate forward. The hedge walls pressed close on both sides. Shafts of sunlight pierced the leaves. The air felt tight. The squad moved in slow steps. Every man stayed low. The sound of boots against damp soil blended with the distant rumble of artillery on the horizon. The first contact came quick. A single rifle shot cracked from the right hedge. It struck the lane ahead and kicked soil into the air. The squad dropped. Keller shouted for eyes on. A German rifleman fired again. The shot struck a root and fragmented. Splinters flew across the ditch. Thorn studied the hedge. He saw a faint depression in the leaves. It barely showed. He lifted his rifle. The improvised sight framed the shadow faster than the standard aperture. He fired once. The German rifle went silent. The squad advanced after a short pause and found a blood trail leading into a narrow cut. The enemy had fallen back or crawled deeper. Either way the threat passed. The lane narrowed further. The platoon heard movement ahead. 2 German voices spoke in low tones. The Americans pressed against the hedge wall. Keller ordered a slow advance. Thorn moved ahead with 2 others. The Germans shifted behind the hedge. Their tone changed. They prepared to fire. Thorn raised his rifle slightly. His sight aligned with a small gap where the leaves thinned. A German rifle barrel slid into view. Thorn fired first. The enemy rifle dropped. Another German pulled back rapidly and shouted for support. More voices answered. The squad readied for a close fight. Keller ordered smoke again. 2 grenades rolled forward and filled the lane with thick gray cover. The Germans fired blind. Rounds struck the hedge behind the Americans. Keller signaled the squad to push left into a connecting cut. They moved fast, using the smoke as concealment. The cut opened into a shallow field bordered by another hedge. The field sloped upward toward the farmhouse ridge. The sound of machine gun bursts echoed faintly from the slope. The Germans held the higher ground. The company knew advancing uphill through hedgerows was dangerous. The Germans often created overlapping fire pockets that shredded approaching units. Harper ordered 2 squads to probe the lower sections while another squad moved around the right flank. Thorne's squad took the left route. They entered a wider enclosure filled with tall grass. The grass moved in uneven waves. The squad dropped to one knee. Thorne scanned through the improvised sight. The wide aperture helped him study the movement across the field. He spotted a faint path where grass had been pressed down. A patrol had moved through recently. He pointed out the trail. Keller adjusted the formation based on the observation. The squad advanced 3 meters at a time. They checked every crease in the hedge. Mortar fire sounded behind them. A round landed close enough to shake the ground. Dirt rained down. Men tightened their grips on their rifles. The Germans were searching for the advancing elements. If they found the right lane, they would bracket the position. Thorne spotted something ahead. A German helmet moved behind the upper hedge line. The silhouette appeared only for a second. He raised his rifle. The improvised sight framed the motion instantly. He fired. The helmet dropped. Keller ordered the squad to hold. A burst of MG fire ripped across the field from the ridge. The rounds tore through the grass. The squad flattened. Harper radioed for supporting fire. The company needed to suppress the machine gun or they could not advance. Mortar crews adjusted grids. Within minutes the first American mortar round struck near the ridge. The explosion echoed through the hedgerows. A second round followed. The MG team paused. The squad used the lull to move into a ditch line along the left hedge. Thorne crawled through thick mud. The hedge above him created a narrow ceiling. Shadows flickered from movement on the ridge. He raised his rifle through a small break in the roots. The fence corner sight let him track the shifts in light. He saw the MG barrel protrude briefly. He fired. The shot struck the lower hedge, but the gunner flinched and drew back. The enemy fire slowed again. The company pressed the advantage. Harper ordered a coordinated push across the lower field. Squads moved in staggered bounds. Machine gun fire resumed but lacked its former accuracy. The Germans struggled to maintain a clear angle through the shifting gaps in the hedge. Thorne reached another firing slit carved into the upper hedge. He scanned through his sight. 2 German riflemen adjusted their positions near the ridge. Their movement indicated preparation for a counterattack. Thorne called out their location. The squad shifted to cover the angle. The bar team fired into the hedge. The Germans dropped lower and lost momentum. A runner arrived from Harper. He relayed new orders. The company would assault the farmhouse ridge from 3 converging angles. Thorne's squad would support from the left flank by neutralizing any German spotters along the upper hedge. The squad advanced again. The climb steepened. Thorne used his sight to study the hedge folds. He spotted a faint horizontal cut that formed a concealed observation slit. A German spotter lifted binoculars through the gap. Thorne fired before the lenses fully cleared the foliage. The spotter fell backward. The counterattack angle collapsed. The ridge fight intensified. Rifle fire cracked across the slope. The farmhouse stood behind a stone wall with firing ports chipped into it. Germans inside fired down at the advancing Americans. Harper ordered smoke placed on the approach. Grenades arced upward. The company surged forward. Thorne saw a German soldier move from the side of the farmhouse toward a supporting machine gun team. He raised his rifle. The improvised sight caught the motion immediately. He fired. The German fell before reaching the MG. The team lost critical support during the American push. The assault breached the farmhouse. Close combat lasted minutes. Germans inside surrendered or retreated through a back trench. The ridge fell to American control by late afternoon. Harper reorganized the platoons and established a defensive line. Casualties were lighter than expected for such terrain. Keller approached Thorne after the ridge was secured. He looked at the improvised sight again. His tone carried recognition. He said the device had saved time and that time had saved men. He did not approve it officially. He understood its value. He told Thorne that officers higher up might reject it, but no one in this squad would challenge it again. Thorne nodded. He wiped dirt from the rusted frame and checked its alignment. The battlefield around him settled into uneasy quiet. Smoke drifted across the slope. The sun lowered behind the ridge. He had built the site because the terrain demanded speed. He kept it because men survived when seconds mattered. Night settled over the ridge with a heavy stillness that rarely lasted in the bocage. The men dug shallow foxholes along the perimeter while engineers marked new routes for the next morning's advance. The farmhouse, now secured, became a temporary command point. Lantern light flickered through its broken windows. The smell of burned wood mixed with damp soil. The company had taken the ridge, but the Germans still occupied several strong points deeper toward the village. A counterattack was possible before dawn. Thorne sat against the stone wall and cleaned his rifle. He removed carbon from the bolt face and checked the op rod for smooth travel. The improvised sight remained fixed to the upper handguard. The rusted frame did not loosen despite the day's firing. He tapped it gently to ensure it remained secure. He checked the alignment by raising the rifle toward the tree line. The wide aperture centered his focus instantly. His eyes adapted to shadow and distance without delay. Lieutenant Harper stepped out of the farmhouse and approached him. He carried a notepad filled with reports from the day's engagements. He crouched near Thorne and asked for a detailed account of the site's use. Thorne explained each moment calmly. He described the angles, the timing, and the seconds saved. Harper took notes without speaking. He understood the significance. He had watched squads struggle for days because doctrine did not match terrain. He recognized that Thorne's device was not a novelty. It was an adaptation forced by combat conditions the manual had never predicted. Harper closed his notepad. He said evaluations would be pushed upward. He said leaders needed to reconsider how rifle sights were used in this environment. He said Thorne had demonstrated a principle that applied beyond one engagement. Thorne listened quietly. Harper stood and returned to the farmhouse. The night passed in shifts. Each man watched the hedgerow shadows, expecting movement. German patrols often tested new defensive lines after dark. They advanced silently, only meters away from American foxholes. They withdrew as soon as they sensed resistance. Their goal was not to attack but to collect information. If a patrol found a weak point, mortar teams exploited it at first light. At 0320 hours a faint scrape sounded beyond the left hedge. Thorne opened his eyes. He raised his rifle slowly. His improvised sight cleared his vision instantly. A shadow moved behind the hedge ribs. The silhouette barely appeared for a second. Another man might have needed time to locate the aperture. Thorne did not. He tracked the shift and held fire. Keller watched beside him. He knew Thorne understood when to shoot and when to wait. Two Germans crept along the hedge, whispering softly. They probed the perimeter. They searched for firing lanes. Thorne tracked their steps through the frame of his improvised sight. The aperture acted like a window that captured motion without narrowing his field of view. He let the Germans move until one stepped closer to a gap in the hedge. The man leaned forward to study the American line. Thorne fired one round. The German fell instantly. His partner dropped low and crawled back into the dark. The patrol ended before it began. Keller whispered approval. The squad remained alert until dawn. No further probes occurred. At first light the company prepared to advance again. The next objective was a road junction that fed the approaches to Villers-Bocage. German resistance increased in that sector. The enemy used concealed firing holes and sniper nests placed deep in the hedge cavities. The company expected heavy losses if they failed to react fast enough. The platoon stepped off at 0620 hours. The hedgerows ahead grew thicker and more irregular. The Germans shaped them into natural fortifications. Riflemen created firing angles that crossed at precise points. Machine gun crews carved deeper pockets. The Americans moved cautiously. They had learned to read the signs. Bent leaves meant a firing hole. Disturbed soil indicated a tunnel. Thorne's eyes moved constantly, scanning through the improvised sight for any irregularity. At 0705 hours the first volley struck. A German MG-42 opened from an elevated slit, firing downward across the lane. The rounds tore through the leaves. The squad hit the ground. Keller shouted for bounding movement. Thorne raised his rifle, scanning for the gunner. The wide aperture captured the rapid motion inside the hedge. He saw the flicker of the barrel shift left. He fired. The shot forced the gunner down. The MG paused long enough for the bar team to reposition. The Americans advanced to a secondary hedge. Thorne spotted a German rifleman climbing into a higher firing niche. The movement was quick. The man tried to position himself before the squad saw him. Thorne raised his rifle. The improvised sight found him instantly. He fired. The German fell backward. Keller ordered the squad to push forward. The lane opened into a crossroads with a shallow ditch along the left. The Germans had built a firing chamber inside the hedge that overlooked all four approaches. The chamber allowed a single sniper to dominate the route. The Americans had taken casualties on this road the previous day. Harper told the squad to clear it. Thorne moved low, advancing through the ditch. He studied the hedge ribs for gaps. He saw a faint tremor in the leaves near a narrow slit. The sniper prepared to fire. Thorne raised his rifle and centered the movement through the frame. The shot landed before the sniper could fire. The chamber fell silent. By midday the company secured the junction. Casualties were again lighter than expected. Harper assembled the platoon and prepared a status report for battalion. The officers studied casualty patterns. They noticed a clear trend. Squads with faster target acquisition took fewer losses. They raised questions about sight design and combat conditions. Harper called Thorne forward. He asked him to demonstrate the sight. Thorne held the rifle at shoulder height and explained the function. He aligned the sight with hedge gaps and distant silhouettes. The officers observed how quickly his eye settled. They understood the principle immediately. It was not about accuracy alone. It was about speed in fractured terrain. A captain asked whether the device reduced precision at longer ranges. Thorne answered that it did not replace the standard rear sight. It supplemented it. The captain nodded. He said doctrine had always focused on precision. The bocage demanded speed. The two needed to coexist. The afternoon brought another German attempt to reclaim the junction. A half squad approached from the north hedge. They moved with discipline. Their patrol leader signaled advance with hand gestures. The Americans held fire until the Germans entered the lane. The leader stepped into a gap. Thorne raised his rifle. The improvised sight captured the motion instantly. The shot struck the leader. The German formation collapsed, echoing the earlier engagement. The remaining riflemen retreated. The officers saw the effect. They saw the pattern. The device ended the fight before the enemy could coordinate. Harper wrote a note in his report. He emphasized that rapid visual indexing had changed the tempo of engagements. Even Keller, who had resisted the modification, accepted its value. He told the squad that survival required adaptation. He said doctrine mattered, but reality ordered the battlefield. As evening approached, the company dug positions around the junction. Thorne cleaned his rifle again. The improvised sight remained in place. The rust did not matter. The shape mattered. The speed mattered. The device had saved men on 3 separate advances and 2 defensive stands. It had broken 2 patrol formations and silenced multiple firing positions before the Germans could act. Higher officers still debated whether to approve it. Regulations rarely changed in the field. But no one in Thorne's platoon questioned its impact. The hedgerow war rewarded those who adapted. It punished those who obeyed terrain slowly. Elias Thorne had seen the land clearly. He had shaped his tool to match it. His rusted fence corner sight had been banned by regulation. It had been necessary by reality.